Okay, Father Moo back again for another quick and dirty synth tricks for your modular system, whether you're using VCV Rack, whether you're using Eurorack, whether you're using synthesizers.com, whether you're using Bug Brand, or even what I'm using, the Nord Micromodular. We should be able to find something in today's tip and trick that should be useful to you. Today I want to talk about orchestration. I came from a musical background where I played in the orchestra. I was the flute player. That's right, flute player. And I learned a little bit from the old classical music theories about arranging music. Like if you had some high notes, you could get the flutes to play them. And if you had some middle range notes, you could get the clarinets to play them. And if you had some slightly lower range notes, maybe you could get a saxophone. And if you wanted to play a low note, you could play it on a trombone. And those four different instruments all have their own tonal qualities. It just they have strengths and they have weaknesses. Some of them are better in a higher notes, and some of them are better at lower notes. Sometimes you might have a case where you want a flute who usually plays high notes to play low ones, or a sax that usually plays lower notes to play higher ones. There's certainly applications for all of that. But I think the key thing I learned was just variety, just to do things differently. So I would like to talk about orchestration as it applies to the modular world today. So what I've built here is a little bit more complex than the patches we've seen earlier in the series. We got a clock over here. We got 3 note sequencers who have been set to just random notes. All of them are on 16 notes, and all of them are sending their gate out to an envelope. And the outputs of those random sequencers are being quantized. This one is to the notes C, D, and G. And this one also in a major pentatonic C, E, and A, and major pentatonic with a note added C, D, G, and the note added is B. So these should be complementary to each other. Although they're random notes, they should be in the same sort of key and sound semi-musical. Each of those are feeding an oscillator. You can see the oscillators have all been set to sawtooth waves. They are all being sent to classic low-pass filters, which have all their default settings, and then sent to the same AD envelopes, which are on their default settings. So I'm going to start the sequencer, and it's just going to play the same note over and over, and as I dial up the pitch inputs on each oscillator, you'll hear the different notes that are randomly being sent out to each of the oscillators. So it'll be incredibly boring at first, get slightly less so. Here we go. There's 2 notes and 3. So I set up this pattern of silly, annoying, repeating notes just to say, if you do one thing on one oscillator, try doing a different thing on the other oscillator. If you have 3 oscillators and they're all set to sawtooth waves, you can still arrange them very differently by setting the filters differently and the envelopes differently, but my general sort of rule of thumb is if I've built a patch and I have one oscillator doing one type of wave, my next oscillator will try to do a different kind of wave just so they won't step on each other's toes as much. Especially in a digital synth, if you send the exact same pitch to the exact same digital oscillator, it should output the exact same digital waveform. At least an analog synth would give you a little bit of uncertainty, but with digital synths, there's very little. So with that in mind, I hope you'll listen along as I change the waveform being used in each of the oscillators. And I'm also going to tune this oscillator up an octave and this one down an octave. And I'll have a waveform that I associate with each one, and I'll explain why. So let's listen again. So for the first oscillator, I'm going to leave the sawtooth on and tune him up. He's on E4, so let's give him E5. Sawtooth waves are very buzzy and can produce a lot of high frequencies, so for a higher tuned oscillator, it's suitable. Let's open up the filter a bit. So that note is already sort of sticking out compared to the others because the filter is open and you could hear those high frequencies. Let's try changing the second one. So I'm going to go from sawtooth to square wave. Hard to hear the difference. Let's open up this filter. That's not bad, but let's give it even more variation and let's create an LFO. This is a sine wave LFO. I'm going to feed it into the input of the pulse width. I'm also going to turn it down to be quite slow. So as I open this up, you should hear the square wave start to drift in a way that the sawtooth doesn't. So again, it adds more motion to the sound. Hope you can hear that. Oh, it's getting thin, and then fat, and then thin, and then fat again. And finally, I'm going to take my third oscillator. This guy is still on E4, so let's send this oscillator down to E3. And I'm going to put a triangle wave on. Again, it's different from the previous two. And triangle waves we traditionally associate with bass lines, so... Now let's open up his filter like we did to the others. Maybe a bit of resonance. So this is what I mean by orchestration. I started it with everything identical just to make the point of how boring it was. And then by introducing these little adjustments, you may even, if you're a very new programmer of synths, you may even say, well, sawtooth is fine and square wave is fine, but how do I know when to use which one? Well, you can use a triangle for making bass, and you can use a sawtooth for higher pitched sounds, but you can also do the reverse, and you should experiment with it and see which sounds more interesting and more useful to you. And obviously this, sending a sine wave to the pulse width modulation is a pretty classic, or you might even say overused tool in the books, but it gives you that variation again. So let's do a little bit more before I run out of time today. Let's take the filter that we used for, you can see this is named Classic LP filter, same as the other one. Let's put a different filter in. Let's take, let's just take so-called filter here. He's not called Classic LP filter, but he is a low-pass filter. This one has the options of 12, 18, and 24. This guy only has 12 and 24. So again, just for variation, I'm going to set this one to 18, leave this one on 24. This guy has the 4 different modes, but I think I'm going to stick with low pass for now and open it up a bit. So the filter should give you some different sort of sonic characteristics that, again, allows each voice to sort of stand out and do its own thing. And finally, for this one, sorry, I'm in the wrong category. Here's another. I was going to go with the multi-mode filter, but let's just go real weird and go to the vocal filter, because I know this one is odd. So by patching this in instead, the vocal filter tries to emulate, imagine if you make a note in your throat and you go and scan through the vowels. That's sort of what this filter is trying to do. So I couldn't really, in the previous one, I tweaked the knobs while I was playing it back. Here I've just paused the sequencers So it's going to be a bit of an abrupt jump to get to these new filter settings, but you should be able to hear more variation in the sounds compared to before. In fact, I'm going to do that same trick I did here. I'm going to send this LFO to this input, which will allow this fader to choose between the different vowels over time. So again, it's not always a question of like which one is right. Is it right to use the classic filter on this, and is it wrong to use the classic filter here? Sometimes the answer can be as simple as just don't do the same thing twice. If you have a WASP filter and if you have a standard filter, use those two different things for two different sources rather than using two identical ones. You might be saying, well, I don't have two identical ones on my hardware modular. Well, that's fine. That's not a problem. But in VCV Rack or in other virtual synths like this one, sometimes just a little bit of variation is its own reward, really. So let's hear what these new filter settings have done to our sequence here. So quite unusual. If I pan through here, you can hear the differences in sound. In fact, let's take the sine wave and feed that to this input instead. It's giving us some unusual, isn't that weird? That sweep. So the first step in variation is really just saying to yourself, if I used one kind of wave here, maybe try a different one just because it's different. If I had a bit more time, I might have set up an oscillator which is unique to this synth, such as the spectral oscillator or the formant oscillator. The formant does sound similar to your voice, and the spectral one is a digital oscillator with a kind of sort of brittle edge, but it can be very useful in cases. Of course, if you're in the modern synth world, you have a huge variety of oscillators to choose from. So it might benefit you to do it this way. In fact, it might benefit you to set up 3 identical copies of the same thing and then switch between the different settings for oscillators or different filter options and just see if you can hear what the differences are. It should help you to train your ear and to understand better what those differences actually mean. Sometimes we go out and we buy a synth with a lot of specs, but what do those specs really do to change the sound? Well, if you set up a sort of A-B comparison here, where you have oscillator A with filter A and then oscillator A with filter B, you can compare one to the other and train your ears to hear what each one is doing differently. So yeah, orchestration and variation is good partners. That's the lesson I wanted to share today. So that's it for me. I've run out of time. I'll be back with more quick and dirty synth tips in the future. Thank you for tuning in. Father Moo out.